Yo, what's going on? Mike from Mike Talk Sports. The most iconic fighter in middleweight history in the UFC is Anderson the Spider Silva, and a recent champion of the 185-pound division is Alex Poatan Pereira. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the hypothetical matchup of Alex Pereira and Anderson Silva in order to determine who would win this hypothetical matchup. So first and foremost, let's break down the physical matchup and the size matchup between the two. Alex Poatan Pereira is 6'4" with a 79-inch reach, whereas Anderson the Spider Silva is 6'2" with a 77.5-inch reach. And where the problems start to come in for Anderson the Spider Silva is really the size disadvantage he would be at. Anderson Silva is a guy who, for the most part, was a natural 205er. Anderson Silva, for the most part, when he was out of training, when he was out of shape, weighed around 205 pounds. And a very good example of this is UFC 200 when that card fell through with Daniel Cormier versus Brock Lesnar. They ended up having Anderson Silva step in as a late replacement. So basically Anderson Silva, with no time to prepare, out of shape and out of camp, can very easily, with little to no weight cut, make 205 pounds, whereas we know this is not the case at all with Alex Pereira. Alex is a guy who at this point in his life walks around at least 230 pounds. Stepping into the octagon as a 185er, he weighs at least 200 pounds in there, if not more. He weighs about 215 to 220 pounds when he steps up in the octagon, whereas Anderson the Spider Silva at most would weigh 200 pounds. If not, he'd weigh about 195 pounds. You look at the guy's physiques, Anderson Silva, let's be honest, is a flabby, fat middleweight. He does not look shredded or cut at 185, whereas Alex Pereira looks absolutely drained and shredded to the bone at 185. So I would give the size and power advantage to Alex Pereira, and it's honestly not even close. It is a pretty significant margin between the two in terms of their size. Now let's break down the striking between the two. Realistically, this would be a striking match. Anderson Silva is not someone who likes to offensively grapple and implement his offensive grappling to his game, even though obviously the margin is so significant between the two. In terms of the jiu-jitsu, Anderson Silva has extremely underrated jiu-jitsu. He's a guy who could survive on the ground with Damian Maia. He could survive on the ground with Vitor Belfort. Hell, he can survive on the ground with Chael P. Sonnen, the undisputed and undefeated champion of the world. So Anderson Spider Silva has very good jiu-jitsu, but in my opinion, again, this would be a bit of a non-factor in this fight. The only time I see Anderson Silva even implementing some of his jiu-jitsu is if he gets knocked down in this fight and he plays possum on the ground, waiting for Alex Pereira to chase him on the ground. But Alex Pereira is smart enough to never chase a guy with deadly jiu-jitsu off his back like Anderson Silva. Getting into the striking department, so these guys are actually familiar with each other in the striking department. Alex Pereira was brought on by Anderson Silva in his fight camp when he fought Israel Adesanya, and if you actually watch that Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva fight, you can actually see Alex Pereira in the corner for Anderson Silva. So these guys have strike together and these guys have trained together. Now, Alex Pereira has faced significantly better strikers in his career. Not only that, but more importantly, the level of competition that Alex Pereira has fought and beaten in the striking realm is not even in the same universe as Anderson Silva. I think that's what really needs to be talked about and explained in this video. The guys that Alex Pereira beat in kickboxing would beat the best opponents that Anderson Silva ever beat on the feet within 1 minute of the fight, guys. Alex Pereira not only is considered one of the greatest kickboxers to ever walk this planet Earth, not only that, but he's beaten some of the best kickboxers in kickboxing history. He's the 2021 Glory Lightweight Champion. He's the first double champ in Glory Kickboxing history. And he won the 2017 middleweight strap at Glory Kickboxing and ended up defending that title 5 times times and never lost in a title defense. Pereira beat the likes of guys like Artem Vakikov, who is a 5-time champ at light heavyweight. He seemed unbeatable at light heavyweight, and Alex Pereira from middleweight moved up and beat this guy. Again, the striking realm in terms of the resume between Alex Pereira and Anderson Silva is not remotely close. Some of Anderson Silva's best wins are against some of the worst strikers he ever faced against, and that's another issue when looking at Anderson Silva. He beat Rich Franklin, who isn't even close to the level of striker that some of the guys that Alex Pereira ended up beating in kickboxing. He beat Forrest Griffin, Damian Maia, Vitor Belfort, and Stephen Bonner. Again, all great MMA fighters, but none of them are even close to the level of a Glory kickboxer. All of those guys I just named, for the most part, are scrappers on the feet. Now, in my opinion, the best striker that Anderson Silva ever beat was Dan Henderson, and Dan Henderson was a very good striker, but let's be honest, he was a guy who relied on his power and relied on that knockout punch power. He's not a guy who was super technical, though Dan Henderson definitely had some high-level boxing. He was tiny out there. He was absolutely tiny compared to an Alex Pereira. And the thing about Anderson Silva is some of his losses came against the best strikers he ever fought. So the best strikers Anderson Silva ever fought include Dan Henderson, who he beat, but outside of that, it's Michael Bisping, who he lost to. It's Israel Adesanya, who he lost to. Uriah Hall, who he lost to. It's Jared Cannonier, and it's Chris Weidman. And I know what you guys are saying. You are nitpicking the back end of Anderson Silva's career and nitpicking all of his losses when he was at the end of his prime. It's not my fault that the best strikers Anderson Silva faced by far are the fighters he lost to and the fighters that he fought when he was out of his prime. That's not his fault. That's not my fault. That is just the fact of the matter. Anderson Silva basically lost to the top 4 to 5 strikers he ever fought in the octagon. You want to look at these guys from a stylistic matchup, and I think that's where the conversation really needs to be had. Screw these guys' records, throw it out the window. Let's look at this stylistic matchup between the two of these guys. Anderson Silva was more of a counter striker. He was never going to walk down a guy like Alex Pereira in a fight. Rather, he was going to counter strike, and that's exactly how Israel Adesanya ended up beating Alex Pereira. So do I think if these two ever ended up fighting in their prime in a hypothetical situation, can Anderson Silva potentially knock out Alex Pereira with a counter shot in the pocket like Israel Adesanya did? Yes, I think that's a possibility, but I think it's pretty fair to say this fight played out 7 times out of 10. 7 out of 10 times, Alex Pereira would just walk down Anderson Silva. He'd get hit with some pretty big shots coming in because Alex Pereira doesn't have the best defense, and he really sacrifices getting hit for getting in some big bombs. But for the most part, Alex Pereira would be just snapping those leg kicks, and he'd be hurting Anderson Silva very badly to the legs. And Anderson Silva's guard was really nice for MMA, but he was a guy who evaded shots more than having a crazy good guard. So Pereira most likely would be able to blast through that guard and land huge shots. And Anderson Silva is a guy who really never got hit, and when he got hit, he went down, let's be completely honest. So I think Alex Pereira would absolutely crack the chin of Anderson Silva. And if these guys ever fought in their prime, I would definitely be picking Alex Pereira to win. Thanks for listening, guys. Let me know in the comment section below who would win this hypothetical matchup between Alex Pereira and Anderson Silva.